Hello, and welcome to Rapid Fire Wednesday, Q&A for corporate immigration professionals. I'm Kimberley Robidoux, a partner in our San Diego office, and I'm joined as always with the co-managing partner of our Boston office, Miki Matrician. How are you today, Miki?
I'm great. Hi, Cam.
Good to see you. Great. So today for our Rapid Fire Wednesday installment, we're going to talk about the different paths by which any presidential administration, but in particular the Trump administration, can make changes to immigration laws and programs and policies so that we kind of know what to expect. So what changes can be made essentially with the stroke of a pen, what take a little bit more action with respect to regulatory processes, and then what are some of those that are unilateral powers that could potentially be done by the president or that we need congressional action. So those are the things that we're going to talk about. Essentially, a president can issue executive orders at the stroke of a pen. So those are things that can be changed immediately. And then changing a regulation can sometimes take several weeks or several months, really depending upon the process and the notice and comment period. And then some other situations that we are going to address that could potentially happen. And of course, we're going to talk about what could happen under the Trump administration. So, Miki, what are some of the things that the Trump administration could change with respect to or by issuing an executive order?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is that the president has the authority over foreign affairs, which basically includes his ability to restrict entry of non-citizens if necessary to protect the national interest. And so former President Trump invoked that authority in 2017 by issuing a country-based ban that was coined the Muslim ban, restricting travel from Muslim majority countries. And then he later expanded that list by adding Chad, North Korea, and Venezuela. And then on the heels of that, it was the COVID travel ban that originally restricted travel from China and Europe's Schengen countries, and, UK, Ireland, and Brazil. Those bans exempted U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents, so green card holders, and their immediate family members and diplomats. Some essential healthcare workers were also exempted. I think really the thing there to know is that presidential administration can, hook things into the national interest and issue an executive order that essentially bans people from certain countries from coming in.
Yeah, those travel bans had a huge impact on not only business, but also business immigration, which is primarily what we're focused on. And, with those, even though we're in a post COVID era, as you mentioned, Miki, if something can be couched as essential within the national interest, then there could be presidential action that is taken that could potentially close the borders or restrict travelers. So, what else could the new administration change fairly easily with respect to an executive order?
Yeah, so enforcement priorities are definitely something that a new administration can change right away by issuing, proclamations or guidance to immigration related agencies like Customs and Border Protection, US Citizenship and Immigration Services, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So some of what Trump has been talking about, mass deportations, those relate to enforcement priorities. So that is well within his scope. And another area is worksite enforcement. So he can ramp up employer investigations and audits. And this is something we've talked about in past episodes. And, we recommend ensuring that companies shore up their compliance programs. And now is really a good time to do an internal self audit. Another way that presidential administrations can implement change is through the use of policy memos. We saw a lot of that with USCIS last time around. One of the first things that we think could go away is the deference policy, which is a longstanding policy that increases the government's processing efficiencies by giving deference to previous approvals. And so if an extension is filed based on the same facts, it's not subject to a high level of scrutiny that a new petition would be. So if the repeal of the deference policy happens like happened with the last Trump administration, that would mean there would be an increase in requests for evidence, which then results in cases taking longer to be adjudicated. And so it clogs up the USCIS pipeline ultimately, and denial rates can increase as well. And so for employers, it would mean increased costs related to preparation of responses to requests for evidence and also appeals of unreasonable denials. And then another thing that we can anticipate is the reinstitution of biometrics, so fingerprinting in photos and interviews. Then those are both eliminated under this current administration under Biden. So essentially, fingerprinting of dependent applicants who were already fingerprinted at the consulate before they entered the US. If it's reintroduced under the Trump administration, it would definitely be another factor in slowing down processing in that way. Under the Biden administration, also interviews were waived for routine cases that didn't have any red flags. And so that allowed cases to be processed more quickly. And so reintroducing or reinstituting interviews for family based cases and then employment based cases like under Trump 1.0 would mean longer processing of cases and then tying up more USCIS staffing resources that are diverted from other case types too.
That's a lot. That can happen with, just a stroke of a pen, essentially, or change in policies. And so you're talking about the changes at USCIS and to some extent with consulates. We're also looking, with this respect to consulates, at potentially a change in interviews. But also, one of the programs that we had recently that was really successful was the stateside visa renewal program. And the State Department had pretty much applauded how well that had run and how efficient it was. And there's some concern that the stateside renewal program for visas might not be re-implemented under a Trump 2.0 administration, right? Which would, again, cause people to have to go abroad to get their visa renewals. And as you mentioned, Mickey, like their interview processing times and actual having to go to the interviews at the consular post versus the visa interview waiver that we've been seeing in a lot of posts for a lot of individuals that are applying for a second visa, even if it isn't the same classification that they had obtained before. So there can be some delays in the processing of visas abroad. And that also, as you mentioned, is something that doesn't need a regulatory change. It can be based on the policy. And, if it's factoring into what's best in the national interest, I think we could potentially see the administration bringing back the Buy American, Hire American policy that was put into place with the first Trump administration. And what that did is it essentially resulted in US employers having a more difficult time to attract foreign talent. And we've seen that over the past few years, whether it's an easy way to bring someone into the US or not, if they're very, very talented, it has been needed by a lot of employers due to some of the labor shortages that we've had here with a low unemployment rate. One of the other things that you and I had talked about was also the high attrition rate at the US consular posts under the prior Trump administration. I think there had been almost 500 individuals within that consular corps, so to speak, who didn't come back to work following COVID, or individuals who just chose to go a different pathway in their career. And then we had some people who took essentially an early retirement so that they weren't involved in a lot of the tough processes for consular processing during that period of time. So those are some of the things that we were talking about from an executive order or just policy changes. Moving on to another thing, Nikki, can you talk to us about what could happen through a regulatory process? And maybe tell us what a regulatory process is for those who aren't as familiar with it as we are.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, Congress has delegated the day to day administration of immigration laws to certain agencies like the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, Immigration Customs Enforcement, CBP. And so those are all under the purview of the executive branch, right? And those agencies can set their own rules by the rulemaking process. So what that is essentially publishing the draft rule in the Federal Register. And there's typically like a justification of the cost benefit analysis, why they're publishing this new rule. They're required to publish the language of the proposed rule for public comment. And then the public can submit their comments during a specified period. And, that's when private individuals and employers can put in their comments about why they agree or disagree about certain rules and what they propose to be changed. And then the agencies have to review all of those comments and they can modify the proposed rule before then publishing the final rule. So that process typically takes at least 60 days. Last time around, the Trump administration skipped some of the critical steps. And so that made some regulations vulnerable. And we found that many were indeed struck by the courts.
And what do you expect to see with the Trump 2.0 administration with regard to regulatory changes?
Yeah, so something that was a benefit or a program that was created by regulatory process can be repealed by regulatory process. So one of the things that had been talked about is a rollback of programs like the H4 EAD, which the Trump administration tried to repeal in 2017, but was not successful. Another one is the optional practical training program for F1 students. So the 1 year OPT work period and then the 2 year STEM extension, those programs may be targeted through the regulatory process as well. And then, in terms of other programs that global mobility and HR professionals may be concerned about, the temporary protected status program. So, to eliminate the program would need to go through the regulatory process, so the minimum 60 days, like we mentioned. But the caveat to that TPS issue is that TPS designations for each country has an expiration date. And so some countries like El Salvador, Ukraine, and Venezuela have expiration dates in the first few months of 2025. So it remains to be seen if maybe the Trump administration will let the country designation simply expire.
Yeah. So those would all certainly have a huge impact on businesses and HR and global mobility professionals with respect to losing, some talent and then trying to potentially have to fill that talent with other foreign nationals or US workers regardless. So it's potentially going to have a big impact. But one of the things that I've been hearing a lot, Mickey, from clients are questions about the H-1B program, especially H-1B cap, which registration will be starting in March. So how would that be impacted potentially under a Trump 2.0 administration?
The cap H1 numbers were passed by Congress, so the numbers available can't be changed without congressional action. So basically, Congress would have to pass a new law that institutes new cap H1B numbers. And the same goes for the immigrant visa numbers as well. Also, for the existence of H1B program itself, as well as other visa categories, those are statutory. So that's not something an administration can unilaterally change by executive order or by rulemaking. That has to go through Congress.
So, Mickey, one of the things that we're going to be busy doing is monitoring all these potential changes so that we can talk to HR and global mobility professionals with what's happening or what is proposed, right? But until then, we really don't have a crystal ball, although that would be lovely to have a crystal ball to know exactly what changes are coming so that we can prepare for those. But to the extent that we can prepare, that's what we're trying to do. It does remain to be seen what Trump is going to make a priority, right? He said a lot of different things about immigration, both legal immigration and quote unquote illegal immigration. So I guess we just kind of have to wait and see to a certain extent what changes he wants to implement right away.
Exactly. And I think, as you said, it remains to be seen how things will roll out, but also, some things are set on the campaign trail, like, students at US universities should get green cards with their diplomas. But then we see on the GOP agenda some interest in restricting the F1 OPT program, like we said. So that definitely would have a negative downstream effect, right? We would see decreased enrollment of foreign students and shortchanging the US labor market of that talent pipeline. So we have to, I guess, just wait and see whether things that were stated are actually going to happen. And I guess just in terms of other thoughts, there are some business people slated to hold key roles in the new cabinet. And I do hope that those people will recognize and persuade the new administration of the importance that immigrants hold in our economy, especially in skilled categories and healthcare and hard to fill categories like H2B that keep our economy going. So I hope the new administration will realize that restricting immigration is to the detriment of the US economy.
Yeah, really good, important points and things to consider. So thank you, Mickey. I guess that's a wrap for our Rapid Fire Wednesday this week. We hope you all follow WR Immigration and/or Mickey and me on our individual profiles. We also turn our Rapid Fire Wednesday into a newsletter that you can subscribe to, and we would love to have you join us. Thanks again, and great to see you, Mickey.
Thanks, Kim.